Hello, podcast listening world, and welcome along to another episode of the Chiltern Learning Trust podcast in association with the Department for Education's RISE programme. If you are somebody who is time limited, but enthusiasm limitless and motivation limitless when it comes to professional development and school improvement, then this is the place for you. In each and every one of these episodes, we talk to a guest from right the way across the sector about all things school improvement with a particularly laser sharp focus on one particular area. And today our focus is going to be on the area of curriculum design, and I'm delighted that I have Alex Fairlamb joining me on this episode today. Before we dive into that, I better also remember to tell you that I am your loyal host, Adam Kohlbeck. I'm the Director of Teacher Quality here at Chiltern Learning Trust, but also have the honour of being the host on this podcast series. So, Alex, how are you?
Good, thank you, Adam. Thank you for having me on.
Absolute pleasure. And we're going to get into curriculum design today. But before we do get into that, do you want to just give everybody a bit of an overview of who you are, what you've been doing, what you're doing now, and anything else to do with your life story that you want to throw in?
So I'm a part-time teaching and learning coach, and I'm a part-time educational consultant. So that involves working with different schools and trusts across the country, focusing on things such as history curriculum development, but also on areas such as scaffolding. I am co-author of The Scaffolding Effect, which I wrote with Rachel Ball, and co-editor of What is History Teaching Now? I'm a fellow of the Chartered College of Teachers and an honorary fellow of the Historical Association. And I've just submitted my thesis, which is focusing on equity and equality in education.
So is it true then that in the not too distant future, you will indeed be Dr. Alex Fairlamb?
Yes, if I behave myself and I get everything ticked off, yes, it could very much be the case that I'm going to be Dr. Fairlamb, and I'm going to insist that my husband calls me that. So yes,
That's what we do, doctors, isn't it? I'm like, I'm still like 2.5 years away from finishing mine, but it is very much like a big motivator is like having my wife call me Dr. Kohlbeck. I don't think she ever will, but anyway. All right, so let's dig into all things curriculum design then. So first question I've got for you, where do leaders most commonly go wrong with curriculum design?
So I think one of the key things is not seeing the curriculum as a narrative, both horizontally but also vertically as well. And we can see that therefore year groups happen in silos. And I see that in particular in primary, where perhaps the year 4 teacher isn't aware of what's been taught in year 2 or year 6. But we see that also in secondary, where perhaps somebody doesn't teach Key Stage 5, so doesn't know what the end of the narrative looks like, those endpoints, or perhaps just teach sixth form and don't know what the starting points are that they're building upon. So I think it's really important to be asking the question is, what's the big question that they're trying to answer across the whole curriculum narrative, and how does what you're teaching in that particular contribute towards that? And I think within that as well, sometimes it can be the case of treating lessons as episodes rather than as part of one big narrative. So it's kind of like a bit like if you were to watch The Simpsons and it's just static episodes with no like running narrative and you could just pick it up at any point, as opposed to if you're watching something like The Wire and, you know, episode 7 wouldn't make sense unless you'd watched episode 1 or 2 or 3, and actually thinking about that longitudinal building up of not only the substantive knowledge, but the concepts and the skills over time. I do think as well, sometimes whilst curriculums may state to be ambitious in nature, actually in reality, sometimes not so. And we see the transition gap, particularly with year 7. So it can sometimes be that there is a disconnect in teacher expectations when students move from primary to secondary, and it can lead to things like in maths, repeated content, or year 7 history lessons where they're spending the lesson, what is history, what is chronology, what is the source? Well, really, according to the national curriculum, that's year 1, year 2 stuff. They should know that stuff. But I think there's this misconception about actually the readiness of students when they're moving from transition to. I mean, I feel like I'm on a whinge list here at the minute. I think the other thing to consider is the curriculum coverage trap. It can be particularly that we've got really curriculum dense in some areas. So we know at Key Stage 4, the GCSE curriculum is massively crowded, and that can lead to perhaps, that we've got this rote learning going on with insufficient time for kind of application, time for really good retrieval, or having kind of discussions, or doing extended writing or extended reading, because there's that need to get the facts learned. But then at primary school, in Key Stage 3, sometimes what I think is that there is perhaps that insufficient depth also alongside this kind of not giving enough time for them to do some really good extended writing or apply the knowledge that they've got longitudinally over a period. Again, it's going back to that episodic aspects of it. I think something to really consider is the amount of time that's given to subjects which aren't considered core. So as a history teacher, it breaks my heart that in some schools, you get one 55-minute lesson a week. It's not enough. It should be the whole timetable when it comes to history. But I think things like history, music, art, and languages, I'm really thinking about making sure that there is an appropriate amount of timetable time, and also that you can sometimes see that they're timetabled later on in the day, and that maths, English, and science get priority earlier in the morning. I think we need to be fair to all subjects. And then I think cohesion and compliancy fixation as well. So particularly if there is a centralised curriculum from a trust, it's how it is that we make sure that we're not straitjacketing people, because we need to allow for local context that actually prevents adaptive teaching, because they think that it's got to be delivered verbatim, download the PowerPoint, deliver as is, be on slide 4 by week 4, etc. And my fear is that we could lose a generation of those with curriculum architecture experience and lesson design knowledge if they're not given the opportunity to design some of the lessons and contribute to, or have really effective training about how you adapt this centralized curriculum which you're being presented with.
So there's quite a lot of traps you could fall into then in that case as like a senior leader.
Yes.
I suppose the one that resonates with me, and it's actually like in this role of host of this series, I kind of have the fortunate opportunity really to talk about what resonates for me, and I'm hoping that it resonates for other people as well. I'm sure these points do, but it's this one about this analogy of The Simpsons versus like a box set, which the first time I came across that analogy was Neil Almond, and when he wrote about that in the Research Ed Guide to Curriculum, however many years ago that was. And it's like it really stuck with me, and like to hear you like bring up a similar analogy there, like it really resonates, because it's so tempting, isn't it? It's so tempting in the hamster wheel of school life to focus on, okay, what am I doing right now today in this exact moment? But actually, unless we get out of the stream and we step back and we think more upstream, we're only ever going to be putting out fires, and like probably the educational equivalent to that is plugging gaps. Whereas if we can get upstream, we can make sure that we plan something with proper coherence and like natural opportunities for retrieval. How often do I come across schools all the time who are like spending a lot of time kind of shoehorning in and designing opportunities for retrieval practice? You think that's with all of the best of intentions, but actually if you come back a couple of layers and think about how this curriculum fits together and how it creates a narrative, you'll have natural opportunities for retrieval coming up. So actually retrieval can extend beyond your lesson starter if you do that.
Yeah.
Well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's that thing that, and Kate Jones writes a lot about the myths around retrieval. And I think it is that thing where perhaps there is this misconception that, retrieval is just the start of the lesson. And my question would be is kind of what have you chosen for them to retrieve and why? Because quite often there's not a rationale behind it. They've just actually, what is the salient fingertip pieces of knowledge that they need to kind of have activated so that this new knowledge, like a coat peg, can like hang on this here. And how then do
Yeah.
you feed that throughout your lesson sequence? Because if, say, for example, I'm going to take teaching Weimar and Nazi Germany, we are by topic 3 going to be looking at how the Nazis undermined democracy and exploited the system. Well, that takes us back all the way to topic 1 when we found out about the Weimar Constitution and proportional representation and the issues of Article 48. So, we're talking about there, like a big period of lesson time. But that's when I would be purposely saying, well, what were the limitations with the Weimar Constitution? How then were the Nazis able to exploit it? And I think it's not seeing retrieval as from lesson to lesson. I'm just going to retrieve what they did last lesson, or this is some stuff that I'm going to get them to retrieve to keep them busy at the start of a lesson. It's about actually what is that narrative over time. And also, say, for example, in year 9, what is it that I'm teaching about perhaps, World War One that I can pull from year 8 in terms of the Industrial Revolution, that I can then pull from the development of science and technology, the printing press in year 7. So again, it's that's seeing it as a narrative rather than it being year group by year group, lesson by lesson episodes.
Well, okay, so let's go a little bit deeper on that one then, because I've heard you talk before about the importance of the curriculum being seen as a narrative in how it's designed, so deliberately becoming a narrative. And I guess that, in subjects like history, for example, maybe they lend themselves naturally to a narrative, but you still got to make some pretty deliberate choices about which narrative you're telling and why that particular narrative. So can you just talk a little bit more and like broadly about the curriculum in general, and like clarify exactly what we mean when we talk about the narrative of curriculum design?
Yeah, so with the narrative curriculum design, I mean that, not seeing the curriculum as a list of topics, which when I first trained to teach, it was like, well, we need to do chartists, we need to do this, we need to do this. And we didn't really think about why in that order, or kind of see the connections through it. And it was like kind of like a shopping list almost kind of going through. Whereas instead, actually, we should have seen it as a really deliberate story. We've got this vast domain of knowledge of which we are selecting. Content that we want to deliver, and therefore also consciously making decisions about what we're not delivering, which we've equally got to justify, why we're teaching this but not this, and how that weaves together as one beautiful story in terms of how you develop conceptual skill and knowledge understanding over time, and how that all weaves and knits together. And, if we're going to take the idea of it kind of being a story, is then really thinking about your purposefully planned for plot points, which are enriched and become more complex over time, which build logically, which are interconnected. So if I think about power and democracy, how that is that in year 7 we may begin to look at, the Whiten and then William I, and how he comes in and he changes society and how power changes at that point. And then, we're going to be revisiting that idea of kind of power and authority when we're then looking at King John and the Magna Carta, when we're looking at challenges to it with the gunpowder plot, charters and suffragettes. That is a narrative that we are going to be coming back and revisiting and enriching with all these different examples of it. And so with a narrative, it's a journey where each lesson and each year builds towards that meaningful overarching narrative. And so I think it's really important that children see each lesson as kind of like a chapter that connects with the previous one. And that's why I think having real openness about the curriculum journey. I'm not necessarily a big fan of those curriculum snakes. I'm going to be honest. I think it takes a lot of time to put together. I'm not sure how much they use powerfully, but I think children do need to have the big picture of what they're studying, why they're studying it, and where they're currently at on that. I think that can be really powerful in whatever format that may take. And that we have those kind of golden threads of kind of like how power or religion or authority is kind of built up over time. So again, if I go back to the evolution of power, someone in year 7 will be studying the Magna Carta, and then in year 9, they'll be studying Chartism and suffragettes. Then in year 11, they'll be looking at power and authority in Weimar and Nazi Germany. You can see there that's the same thread of power and authority, but just different timeframes and settings. And they're able to kind of look backwards as well as kind of then consider what might come next and apply it to their modern day understanding of, what's going on globally. And I think that helps us to overcome that episodic learning where they feel that, every lesson they're learning something brand new that's not related to something that they've done beforehand. And that's why, having that kind of your last lesson we had a look at. And do you remember when we studied this in year 7? Look how this is manifested by this point. And that's why what we're saying about the retrieval is really important. Making sure it's not just retrieval from like last week, last lesson, actually retrieval from the longer, the journey of it. So I think we could be better explaining the how and the why our learning is connected with the students, and avoiding seeing, success in the curriculum is coverage, like, how quickly we can get through it, as opposed to like how we can, because we know that learning takes place when there's thinking, and actually how we can create those opportunities to think and to apply what they know and to apply it in different contexts. Because I've just finished reading Benny Cara's book on Nuttall's Hidden Life of Learners. And in it, she talks about how he says about you should have 3 to 4 encounters with the knowledge within a lesson. So if I think about it, I might explicitly teach the word authority, and then we'd read an extract where we've got she-wolves, where the women are challenging authority, traditional medieval authority. And then I might get them to turn and talk about what does that mean in terms of the power that women were able to wield, and then they'll write about it. Are we really creating the opportunity for all those encounters? Are we teaching the word authority? Now you're going to write about it. Now on to the next lesson. I am going to say this because I'm a history teacher. Like, we are storytellers, and stories are really rich. We know that William says, our minds privilege stories, and I think we've got to see ourselves as, rather than just people who stand up and deliver the curriculum, that actually we are storytellers and guides, and we've got to take them with us.
Yeah, and I think that if you think about fundamentally what's that curriculum trying to do, is trying to create um, strategic opportunities for kids to think hard about these deep concepts. And I think your point there around it takes place when thinking takes place is really, really, it's a really important one to bear in mind, I think, when you're making those curriculum design decisions, because how many different ways and different opportunities are we constructing for students to think deeply about these particular concepts? And that's important, I think, because rather than trying to think about teaching a concept as, right, I really need to stick a pin right in the heart of this concept, it's about kind of creating the parameters of the concept so that kids can see the flexibility of it, where the concept begins, where it ends, what it is, but also what it isn't. And I think the more opportunities you construct for students to be able to interact with concepts in different ways and in different contexts, the better their understanding of where the parameters are, and the less likely they are to feel like, okay, I need to be, this thing is defined by one particular definition, right?
Exactly that. It's going from knowing, so that rote knowledge, that pub quiz knowledge, when was Battle of Hastings 1066,
Mm-hmm.
moving it through the being able to explain, well, why is it that, Norman England the Normans transformed England, to then that powerful, malleable knowledge in terms of, well, actually, then what does that mean for what power looked like in the 1400s, 1600s, comparably in the 1900s? And so it's, as you said, it's that opportunity to really kind of take it from being this static fact and building that kind of schema and those different examples that sit around it.
Okay, so if I was a senior leader or head of department in a school, somebody with responsibility for thinking about the design of the curriculum, and you were to give me one thing that you think, right, over the course of the next week, if you want to improve your curriculum design, this is one thing that you should spend your time doing, whether it's researching something, thinking about something, planning
Mhm.
in time for something over the course of the next week, what would that be? And then, as a follow-up to that, in that kind of more medium or long term, or through that more medium or long term lens, what is it that I should be doing?
So I think in the first week, what you wanted to do is you wanted to gain clarity over where you are currently at. And I think that's really important. Too often we are action focused and we'll jump into doing something, and that's with the best intent. Education moves really quickly. It's a high accountability culture. We want things to be the best that they can, but effectively what this time is, it's a time to revisit your vision, check, is it really ambitious? Is it logical? Is it resulting in positive outcomes for all students? So your disadvantage, or what I refer to as underserved students. Is it, as Mary Myatt says, is it live not laminated? And really think about, the vision that you've got. Is the implementation of it having that intended impact of it? And so I think it would be a really good opportunity to watch. So to go and have a look through lessons, ask students, ask teachers, and really listen, do that active listening. What's working, what isn't, what needs exploring further, what bloat is there, and really make sure that the variety of stakeholders are kind of involved in that process. And then I think from that, consider your intent versus implementation. Is it being implemented as intended? And begin to consider perhaps what subject PD in the future might be useful, or what time you're going to need, or if there's any further information that you need to gather before you kind of make your diagnosis, if you like. Because again, we don't want to rush into this too much. We've really got to make sure that we're triangulating. I would probably then say in the term, what I would do is I would put together a timeline for development. So you've done your kind of your information gathering, you've begun to evaluate what does that mean? Actually, what does that look like in a chunk sequential professional development? Because again, we need to be seeing professional learning as a curriculum, and as a narrative itself, rather than this kind of like firefighting kind of thing. We'll throw in a head of department lesson and all that sort of stuff. So I think that's when you would kind of say, right, okay, well, in this week, we're going to have a look at the vision and we're going to adapt and we're going to tweak it. Then what we're going to do is we're going to carve out some time for auditing of the curriculum and assessment and secure what is and isn't working based on this initial hypothesis that I've gathered. Then I would really look at kind of like research. So generating kind of a list of kind of really good pieces of research to look at, whether that be a podcast or whatever, and map that out across when that's going to take place in the short, medium, and long term. It's because we know this is going to take like a year, maybe 2 years, and consider what that short term professional development priority is. But I think also if you're being sensible, and I know the new national curriculums aren't coming in until, 2027, 2028, is I would sensibly be looking at the CAR and DfE recommendations to the CAR. Because, whilst we don't have the meat on the bones, we do have the bones of like they are going to be, looking at oracy and sustainability and diverse and globalized experiences, and reading's a priority. So it would be really sensible to not leave that until the draft comes out, and instead begin to think, what are we already doing here that's really working and speaking to that? But where might there be flex, and what reading can we do around that to make sure that come that we're building it in meaningfully? Um, and then I think in the next year, it's that sustainability. So actually how you're going to protect teacher time so that you can carry out this timeline of development that you have spent a long time forging, build in time for curriculum reflection and development and subject professional development into the calendar. I would really use kind of Adam Robbins' snag lists. I think those are great. So, as you're going through different topics, each teacher is kind of adding the little snags, and then building in each half term time to kind of move that, align that with the vision. What can we get rid of? Is this speaking to what the car is telling us? And, it could be really useful within those reflection sessions to have the books of the students and to have curriculum conversations and people voice and outcomes alongside it. Saying, well, we said the vision was this, and we're saying that it's been implemented like this. But actually, this is what we're seeing when we're speaking to the children and having a look at the books. It's not quite translating. So that would be the approach that I would go for. That because I think, as Dylan Williams says, change is slow. And we've got to make sure that we're going for meaningful change and sustained change as opposed to kind of firefighting and running from one thing to another.
That's fantastic. I mean, so, you've got this kind of short-term focus that we're recommending to people around just watch, ask, understand, like fully understand what it is that your starting point is, and where you're starting from. Over the medium term to longer term, you're looking at creating this timeline for development. And then over that longer term, it's really thinking about, as you're enacting your plan, spotting where some of the issues are with that plan as it begins to be rolled out, so that you can then iterate it and continually improve it. I think that's that's really, really sound advice, and I think that there'll be a great deal of value that listeners will be able to take from that, both over the short, medium, and long term. So, thank you for that, and thank you for joining us on this episode as well. I think in just a little under 25 minutes, we've been able to drag quite a lot of quality and value out of Alex there. So thank you so much for spending the time with us today, Alex. And thank you to all of you out there listening in podcast world as well. We hope that you have taken a great deal from that. Doubtless that you have. And if you have, please do remember to like, share, subscribe, Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, doesn't matter. But really just try to help us to spread the word about this podcast series so that the impact of it can go as wide as it possibly can. Until next time, have a lovely week, and I hope you're looking forward to our next episode of the Chiltern Learning Trust podcast in association with the Department for Education's RISE programme. Alex, once again, thanks for joining us, and have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Bye.